Well, if you have your Bibles, you can open them to Exodus chapter 2. Exodus chapter 2. This morning we begin to look into the early life and calling of Moses. One thing that we must grasp about this chapter and the moments that we read about in these next two chapters is that these become a defining moment in Israel's history. When God's anointed Moses, through whom the law would come, through whom the sacrificial system would come, through whom the traditions would come, is born and called by God to deliver his people out of Egypt. To sort of give you an idea of just how drastic this moment in history is, Stephen, the first Christian martyr who was appointed as a deacon at the first church in Jerusalem, as he stands before Jews who are about to stone him, deems it necessary to spend some of the last couple minutes of his his life, and using some of his last words to recount the early years of Moses, his birth and his calling to deliver people out of Egypt. And he uses the life of Moses in these moments to share the gospel with the Jews who are fixing to put him to death. And there are several elements in this story, theological elements, doctrinal elements, pragmatic elements, that are going to be explained, things pertaining to God, how he deals with his people, how he redeems his people. There are many connections to the gospel that can be made in Exodus chapter 2 and 3. And so my desire is that over the next couple of weeks, we're going to take our time in Exodus chapter 2 and Exodus chapter 3 so that we can glean from it as much as possible, so that we don't miss any of these defining moments in Israelite history that so quickly becomes redemptive history. So if you will, stand with me, and we're going to read Exodus chapter 2, 23 through 25, and this is going to serve as a core of verses as we work through these two chapters, and then we're going to deal with some truths pertaining to Moses' life and calling from all of chapter 2 through verses 3:10. It says, after a long time, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned because of their difficult labor, and they cried out, and their cry for help because of the difficult labor ascended to God. God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the Israelites, and God knew. You may be seated. We are at the peak of Israel's oppression. We are at the peak of Israel's oppression. Israel's intensified Egypt, the Pharaoh has intensified labor. Israel's feeling the weight of intense labor falling on them, unpaid labor to be exact. Not only that, he has now threatened to kill the firstborn male of all women, kill all the males, don't let any of them live. We have seen how the midwives handled this situation, choosing faith and morality over ease and appeasement to the Pharaoh. They saw God as the authoritative one. Yet things continue to get worse and worse and worse. In verses 23 through 25, it's some of the sweetest verses in the Bible. There are several verbs here that I want to point out. They cried out, their cry to help. God heard their groaning. He remembered his covenant. He saw the Israelites, and he knew. What did he know? He knew that it was time to fulfill the promise that he had given to the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the rest of chapter 2 and the rest of chapter 3 serve as the means by which God is going to answer the cries of the Israelite people, and in so doing, fulfill the promise that he had given to them many years before this very moment. And his answer is Moses. His answer is to raise up a Levite boy who is going to grow up and is going to be called to go to the Pharaoh and stand before him and say, you need to let my people go into the wilderness so we can worship the one true living God. And so this morning, I want to take chapter 2, verse 1 through chapter 3, verse 10, and sort of just look at how God moves Moses into position to be the one who is going to lead the people out of Israel. And then next week, we're going to come back and we're going to focus on God and how he is acting supernaturally to display his power. But I want to focus on the man Moses this week. I want you to see point number 1, born a Hebrew, raised Egyptian. There are 3 things that we see here in chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. The first thing that we see is we see a mother's faith. A man from the family of Levi married a Levite woman. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. And she saw that he was beautiful, and so she kept him 3 months. She kept him as long as she could, and then they get to a point where he can't hide him anymore. If you don't believe me, Maggie was a year old. By the time Maggie was 3 months old, she was impossible to keep quiet. Many of you remember that. Chris remembers many of times having to get up with Maggie in his arms because she wouldn't stop crying and walk around the sanctuary with Maggie. Scott had to do the same thing. Ben had to do the same thing. Why? Because a 3-month-old can't keep quiet. So naturally, Moses' mom goes, if I can't get him quiet, they're going to kill him. So all she knows to do is to step out on faith. She makes a basket of reed. She puts him in the basket and she puts him in the Nile River. She doesn't know what's going to happen from there. All she knows is that he's going to go and hopefully somebody's going to get him and somebody can keep him alive and somebody can take him in and the boy's going to live and she's going to have to be okay with that. And it's this mother's faith that Moses is going to be fine, that God is going to take care of her baby, that God is going to be the one to preserve his life, that sets into motion a series of events that is going to result in the redemptive work of God to bring Israel out of Egypt. Mothers, I want you to look at me for just a moment. Fathers, you can too. But mothers, I want you to listen to me. Never discredit the power that a mother's faith can have on history. Not just your household. Not just your workplace. History can be turned upside down through a single mother's faith. And let that be your encouragement. Mothers, soon-to-be mothers, waiting to become soon-to-be mothers, whatever situation you're in, let that be your encouragement to remind yourself that your husband may be the spiritual leader. That doesn't mean you get a pass on being spiritually mature and exercising spiritual faith. Because your faith can result in the redemption of a nation. If you don't believe me, if Billy Graham was here today, he would tell you that a lot of his faith is owed to his mother. If you don't believe me, a lot of Timothy's faith was owed to his mother and his grandmother. Do not discredit the impact that a mother's faith can have on nations. And sometimes, brothers and sisters, God is going to ask of us to do things that we don't understand at the time. Put yourself in Moses' mother's position for just a moment. Here is my 3-month-old baby boy, beautiful as he can be, but as loud as he's ever going to get. And if I don't do something about it, they're going to come and they're going to kill him. All I can do is put him in a basket, float him down the Nile, and trust that God is going to take care of the rest. Put yourself in her position for just a moment. It would be so bizarre if I felt in a moment that that was completely necessary. But brothers and sisters, God has worked through strange circumstances over and over and over for the sake of providentially working in redemptive history. And what this means is that it is going to require us to step out on faith in these very strange circumstances in life, because God can do more with willingness than he can with our own power, or than what we can with our own power. God can do more with a person who simply trusts in him than he can with a person who only trusts in themselves. I've seen some strange circumstances play out in my life, my father being one of them. My father is one of my favorite people on this planet Earth. He refused to let us experience what it was like to grow up in a broken home, although him and my mom were split up. He refused. As a matter of fact, he was at my house every morning, 7 a.m., yelling about the AC being on. He was cooking breakfast for us at 7:30 so that we could catch the bus by 8, so that we could get on the bus. He didn't live with us. He didn't like my mom. I can say that now because they're really good friends now, but it was a strange circumstance. It was a strange place to be. But because I had a father who valued us the way that he did, it played a vital role in me giving my life to the Lord later on in life when I turned 18 years old. Because I remember my dad being there and my dad talking about the Bible, and he was obsessed with it. He was obsessed with it. Of course, he was obsessed with other things and substances as well, and that was also a very strange circumstance, but praise be to God Almighty, he's delivered him from the stronghold of the drugs and things that he was on, and he's living faithfully for the Lord. But my household was a strange place, because I had my mom and my stepdad and my real dad and sometimes several cousins living in the same place as me. But God used that to save me and to save my brother and to save my sisters. And God is going to put you in strange circumstances in your life, and all you can do is just be willing to step out on faith. All you can do is just say, God, I don't know what you got going on. I don't know what's happening. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to keep my nose to the grindstone, and I'm going to keep working, and I'm just going to keep doing the last thing you called me to do, and I'm going to be faithful to that, and I'm just going to let you handle what only you can handle. And that is a lot of the Christian life in a nutshell. He works, we work, good things happen. He works, we doubt, we miss out. He works, we get lazy, we miss out. But the Christian faith is digging ditches and watch God fill the ditches with water. We see a mother's faith. We also see a daughter's compassion. He floats down the Nile River. He gets stuck. You know, if they were in Mississippi, he would have got stuck in some kudzu. But he gets stuck in something. We don't know what. He gets caught in some of the bushes and whatnot that's hanging out around the Nile River. And out comes, of all people, Pharaoh's daughter. Pharaoh's daughter uncovers a little basket that Moses is in, and she looks at him, and he is a beautiful baby boy. And there is no doubt in my mind. The pages don't say it, but it's implied that this is the first time that God works to turn the heart of someone close to Pharaoh in order to preserve the life of Moses and the life of Israel. Because when she looks at this little boy, she has compassion. Brothers and sisters, not only is God going to work through strange circumstances in your life, but God is going to use some strange people in your life. He is going to use some very unlikely people in this world to bring about His redemptive purpose. And God will use unlikely people because everyone alive is here to bring about God's will. Even the most radical atheist is being used to bring about the redemptive will of God. I'm convinced that God allows atheists to keep going just to keep showing how often they can't disprove Him. I'm convinced that God allows false religions to exist so that the ones who get it and the ones who see it can see just how great and alive and mighty and powerful the one true living God truly is. Doesn't matter, that's the Psalms. The people turn to idols, but the idols are dead. They can't do nothing for them. But the God of heaven speaks and things are created. The God of heaven sees and things are accomplished. The God of heaven breathes and life is formed. You don't get that from Allah. You don't get that from Muhammad. You don't get that from Buddha. You don't get that from any other religion. But all of creation exists to bring about God's redemptive will. Be it a vessel of glory or a vessel of wrath, as Paul says in Romans chapter 9. A vessel of wrath prepared beforehand for destruction. There are things that exist in this life that are simply to be destroyed. Idols, false religions, and so on. For the sake of God's redemptive purposes being accomplished. Thus, don't count the unlikely person out in any scenario. So I've met some wacky people in my life. Wacky people, nut jobs. And then I remembered God saved me. And if He can take a rebellious moron named 18-year-old Michael Graves and save him, there's not too much low-hanging fruit that He can't reach. And brothers and sisters, let that spur you on to go in confidence with a gospel that is able to save the least and the most. Because it is only the gospel that has the power unto salvation. No other. But in all of this, we see God's providential work. What I want you to understand from this is that we just have to learn to trust in the providential work, the sovereignty with purpose work of God to accomplish all that He said He is going to accomplish. In the midst of all of this, when Pharaoh picks up Moses, Pharaoh's daughter picks up Moses, it's really funny because then she says, hey, this is a Hebrew boy. We need a Hebrew woman to nurse him. And of all the people they could have went and gotten, guess who he ended up with? His own mama. Thus, this simple act of faith allowed Moses' mom to keep her baby boy, so Moses was going to grow up with Hebrew influence, and not only that, Moses was going to grow up with Egyptian influence. And in all of this, God is going to give Moses a foothold both in the political sphere of the Egyptians and the religious spiritual sphere of the Israelite community. And in the same way, we see God providentially work to preserve the life of the one who would lead his people in the Exodus. We see in the same way God preserved the life of his only begotten Son in his birth and early years to bring redemption for all people. The new Exodus in which all peoples, tribes, tongues, and languages could look to the Good Shepherd, could look to the Son who was spared not by his father, in the way that Moses was spared, so that redemption could be afforded at the cross. Many times this is why we see Jesus tell people, don't say anything. Why? It wasn't time. It wasn't time. God was sparing his Son from anything other than the crucifixion and the cross that was predestined before the foundations of the world. In the same way that God spared Moses. Let's look at point 2 quickly. Point 2 is quick. We'll come back next week and do point 3. Born a Hebrew, raised Egyptian. Point 2, ran from Egypt, moved to Midian. One of the issues that Moses has to grow up with is a bit of an identity crisis. As a matter of fact, we see this in verses 11 through 21. That Moses, who had grown up, he went out to his own people, so he obviously grew up knowing that he was Hebrew by birth. I think sometimes we can get a little confused on that and think Moses had no idea that he was an Israelite. Moses was very aware that he did not walk like an Egyptian. Some of you will get that. He knew that he didn't quite fit in with those people. He knew his origins, yet he was raised at the royal courts of Pharaoh. And so one day Moses is out and looking all around, seeing no one. He sees an Egyptian treating a Hebrew man harshly. And so what does Moses do? He runs up to him, clocks him in the noggin, kills him. Drops him. Chris Brown 1-2. And so what happens is the next day he goes outside and 2 Hebrews are fighting. Moses' solution, go up to him, brothers, what are you doing? Are we not blood brothers? Are we not of the same family? What is happening right here? And one of the Hebrews looks at Moses and he goes, what, are you going to kill us like you did that Egyptian? It's in that moment that this identity crisis becomes very apparent to Moses. And if it's not apparent to him by then, it's going to become very apparent when he gets to his father-in-law in verses 19. When he goes out, the daughters are out there trying to draw water, and they look at their father and say, an Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He grew up under his own mother's care, learning his Hebrew heritage. He grew up in the Egyptian court under the Pharaoh daughter's care. And all of this is creating this tension in which Moses knows that he's where he doesn't belong. Thus, it leads to this spur of a moment decision that forces him to get away from Egypt. And brothers and sisters, can I be quite honest with you that the hardest part of the Christian life is that we are constantly in a battle with an identity crisis. And it might seem strange to think that in the midst of all of this turmoil in the life of Moses, God was preparing him to be the deliverer of the Hebrew people. Your salvation and Christian walk requires you to spend some time in Midian, seen as an Egyptian. A time period where your identity is called into question and who you are and what you stand for has to become one with Christ and has to become one with his word. Because the greatest struggle of the Christian life is recognizing that we are in a place that we do not belong. That we are in a world that hates us, that is against us, that is looking forward to the day when they get to persecute us and intensify our lives for us. We are living in a world that wants us to assimilate to it, that wants us to agree with it, that wants us to buy into its quote unquote truths, that wants us to get into the propaganda, that wants us to get in routine with it. And all the while, we are called to be in the world, but not of the world. And it is hard, to say the least. You get around some old friends, what do? You revert to your old ways. You find yourself in a situation that is less than ideal, you blow up. And you forget who you are and whose you are. And you give yourself over to the world. Brothers and sisters, I want you to understand this. This is what salvation does. It takes the old creation, the old identity, and does away with it. And it makes you new. And the purpose of the new creation is that you're always longing for more than what this world has to offer. Because you recognize that you don't belong here. That you're a citizen of a better place. C.S. Lewis said this. He said, the whole world finds itself longing for something more than what this world has to offer. Could it be then that we were created for something different than this world? For something more than this world? And the answer is yes. But if you buy into this world, your life begins and ends with it. But if you believe in Christ, you give him your life, you place your identity with him, and you become his, you're saved, and you're promised an eternity in the place where you truly do belong. A place of abundance, a place flowing with streams of gold, mansions, a place where there is no pain, no fear, no scary worries of this world, no persecution, no bruises, no bumps, no nicks, no imperfections, but what God originally intended for your life to be. Perfect and in unison with him. So have you placed your faith in the one whom God raised up to be the deliverer of all nations? Jesus Christ. Have you called on the name of the Lord and been saved? If not, let me encourage you this morning to run to the cross of Jesus Christ and ask for the forgiveness of your sins and make him the Lord of your life. Have you trusted your life within the providential care of God to work all things out according to his good pleasure? In other words, are you living your life understanding that God can do far more than what you can ever accomplish? Thus, you're just going to give every aspect of life over to him. All relationships, all situations, all circumstances, all troubles, all worries, all occupations, whatever it may be, all of my life is God's. So that he can do that which brings about his good pleasure. If not, let me encourage you, surrender it all. We sing it regularly for invitation. I surrender all. What that means is that there is not a component of your life that you keep for yourself. All of me, all of my personality, all of my essence belongs to the God of heaven for Him to work with. Let me encourage you. Surrender it all to the God of heaven. But whatever you do not neglect to respond to the word of the Lord this morning. Jose's going to come and he's going to lead us in a hymn of invitation. Brothers and sisters, let me encourage you in this moment to respond accordingly to the way that the Spirit moves you.